Hey everyone, this is Chappie here at Intense, and for today's video we're going to be going through the unboxing and assembly of our Intense 951 Trail. If your bike was purchased with a water bottle cage and pedals, it will be in this box. Set that aside. And then also over here we're going to have our toolbox. We'll go over the details of this here in a moment. Set this on the bench. Then also in our wheel stabilizer, you'll see we'll also have an accessory bag. So this will have all of the important documents associated with your bike, as well as some extra tools that we will use for the assembly process. So let's take a look at what we have in our accessory box. So as you can see here on the right hand side, we have a couple bottles of tubeless sealant that's included with your bike. These are used for converting each of your wheels to tubeless. And in this box, we'll have our shock pump. We will use this to get our suspension set up, which we also have technical videos on the sag setup process. And lastly, we have this box, and this contains our torque wrench. This will have all the necessary bits that we need to torque most major components on our bike and finish assembly. Moving on to the bag that comes with your bike. This bag will have all of the pertinent information for your bike, including serial numbers, important documents, also user manual for many of the spec components on the bike. And then most importantly, we will have a 3-way and a T25L that we will use to complete assembly before we move on to torquing the components. So we'll go ahead and pull those two tools out because we will use those here in a few minutes. Let's go ahead and get the bike out. So we'll remove some of the primary packaging. So we'll go ahead, grab our bike. We're just gonna pull the front of the bike up. Just taking care to manage the placement of the handlebars. Slide the fork over the nose of the box and then just rest into position like this. From this point, we can continue on with, basically we're gonna prep the handlebars for install. So we'll do that by pulling our handlebar box cover off. For this video, we're gonna go ahead and leave our clear plastic sleeves and our grip protectors on. This will help protect our grips and handlebars when we go to flip the bike over to complete wheel installation. So we'll leave those on. We'll just gently roll the handlebars down onto the fork box here. And then from this point, we will get our stem ready by turning it around. So to know that your stem is facing the right direction, we will have the stem faceplate pointing forward, and that's the same direction as the arch of our fork. We're gonna go ahead and take that included 3-way Allen that we have, and we're gonna use our 4mm. We're gonna go ahead and remove each of these 4 stem faceplate bolts. For reinstallation, you can go ahead and leave the 2 top bolts in place, and that will help us when we go to install our faceplate. So moving on from there, we're gonna go ahead and grab our handlebars. We wanna make sure that the Intense logo is on the rider's right-hand side, as well as the Sacred Heart logo in the center of our stem. We can go ahead and position our stem faceplate using those bolts that we helped to hold into the opening of that faceplate. We can go ahead and start the threads by hand. All right, with those started by hand, we'll again take the 4mm Allen on our 3-way, and we will proceed to cinch these down. So at this point, we're just going to go to snug. Now before we cinch these down to where they're just snug, we want to make sure that our bar is oriented and positioned center of the stem. So we'll use our hash marks on either side of the stem to make sure that the stem is centered left to right, and then also rolled to where the Sacred Heart logo lines up right in the middle of the stem. So once we're happy with that positioning, that'll give us a good start on setup, and we'll go ahead and just kind of cinch these down to where they're just snug. After we complete assembly, we will go through with our torque wrench and torque each of the components that we have installed. So we will address this later on. Let's go ahead and get the bike prepped to pull out of the box and onto the ground. So we're going to do that by elevating our seat by using our dropper post. So the dropper post is actuated here on the rider's left-hand side by this lever here. So one of the benefits to a dropper post is it gives you a lot of flexibility on the trail, having the ability to get the seat down and out of the way, and also getting it back up to your preferred position really quickly. Also, another fun benefit with this is also coming to a stop. So if you're a shorter rider like me, it becomes very easy as you come to a stop. You can depress that lever, get that seat down so you can touch the ground easily without having to hop off the saddle. Use our thumb lever here. We'll depress that and we'll watch our seat come up. Once it's come all the way up and has stopped moving, we'll release that lever, which will lock it into that position. Let's go ahead and throw our grip cover back on, just as a precautionary to make sure our controls stay scratch-free. From this point, let's go ahead and pull the bike out of the box. Get the packaging off. Let's proceed with installing our rear derailleur. There's definitely a couple points we want to go over as we go through this installation, and that will just ensure that our bike will shift properly and everything is working good. Let's take a look at a couple of the key features that we need to pay attention to as we go for installation. So first is this flat surface here on our derailleur hanger. Then second is the notch on our rear derailleur here. And then third is our B screw where it hits our B plate. So it's really important that as we go through the install that this B plate is pressed up against our B screw here, the silver screw. And then after that, we want to make sure as we line up our rear derailleur that our B plate here is behind the flat surface of our hanger there. Take the 5mm Allen on our included 3-way. We will slowly begin to turn the derailleur bolt into position. Get a couple turns in, and then once we get a couple turns in, we can release the derailleur, and you'll see everything will rest into its appropriate position. Once we can confirm that is aligned properly, we will continue on with tightening this bolt. And then again, just make sure, pushing forward on the rear derailleur, that those surfaces are all contacting each other at one time. Once we're sure of that, go ahead, quarter turn back, snug that into position. Let's go ahead and prep the derailleur for wheel installation. So what we'll do is we'll grab the back of the lower cage of our derailleur here. We will rotate this to the front of the bike. And once this is at about a 45-degree angle, we're going to push this small button with the lock symbol and hold that into position and slowly release the cage of our rear derailleur until it stops on the pin. So what this does is just hold the derailleur cage out of the way, makes installation of the rear wheel much easier. And then from there, we're going to remove our pad spacer, slide the quick release lever of our rear axle out, push it over to one side and turn in a counterclockwise direction, and this will remove our axle. Once that's free, we'll slide that out. So we have our rear wheel here. This is our rotor guard, so we'll pop this off. And as we do this, there's a couple things to take note of. You'll see this caution sign. Basically what this sticker is calling out is to make sure that none of the hub end caps are still stuck to this before you toss this away. Also, as we're removing this, just make sure that you do not touch the rotor in any way. Any oils or contaminants on your fingers can contaminate the rotor and really hinder braking performance. So we want to make sure that rotor stays clean and we don't touch it. So got that side off, and then again, we have another hub end cap on this side. We'll remove this, make sure nothing's stuck to the back side of that. And then our rear wheel is ready to go in the back of our bike. So one trick is use your thigh as a guide. We can kind of slowly bring that wheel into position. We'll pull our rear derailleur back. And what we want to do here is line up the chain on the smallest gear of our cassette. We'll line that up just like that. We'll make sure that our hub is directly over the dropouts of our rear triangle. And then now we're going to move over to the rotor side and make sure the rotor is aligned in between the brake pads. We'll go ahead and slide our rear brake rotor into the rear brake caliper. Just take time, make sure everything's aligned. Once you have it aligned, everything should drop into place very easily. And let's go ahead and install our rear axle. So coming from the non-drive side, or rider's left-hand side, we'll go ahead and insert our rear axle, slide into position, and then with a slight amount of inward pressure, we'll go ahead and begin turning this in a clockwise direction. We'll go ahead and snug this axle into position. We will push the lever up and in line with our axle and push this lever in. In the last step, we will unlock our rear derailleur, pushing the lower cage of our rear derailleur forward, and we will watch this button unlock itself. Once you hear that click, you know it's unlocked and has been freed, so we will go ahead and slowly release the lower cage of our rear derailleur until it puts tension on the chain, and once that is done, this process is complete. So now let's move to the front. Make sure the hub end cap is not on the protector and is still on your wheel. Again, we'll check to make sure the hub end cap is not on the protector and is still on our hub. All right, so let's remove our axle by flipping this lever up and then spinning in a counterclockwise direction. So, undo the rubber band, slide this guy out. So again, using our thigh as a guide, we will begin to line everything up over the dropouts. So here's our dropout, here's our hub. Make sure that is aligned, and then now we're going to align our rotor to our brake caliper. Once we have assurance that the brake caliper and rotor are aligned, we can begin to slowly drop the wheel into position. Once everything's aligned, it will drop in nice and easy. So we'll take our axle, slide into position with the lever flipped open, and turn in a clockwise direction until snug. So one important thing as we go to install our front axle is that it is a quick release system. So if we just go ahead and tighten this all the way, our lever will not flip over, which will not lock our axle into place. So what we want to do is the lever is already preset to the appropriate location. We want to get that thing turned in enough to where this lever still has some movement. And we want to depress firmly that lever into position. We never want this lever facing forward, down, or in most any other direction other than straight up. This is where the bike is set up to be ran, so we will place that lever in line with our fork. With the bike upside down, this is a great opportunity to go ahead and install your pedals or the pedals that you purchased along with your bike. So a couple things to take note of. Pedals are directional. There's one that'll be specific for the left-hand side of the bike, or rider's left, or the rider's right-hand side of the bike, or drive side. And this is signified by the markings embossed on the pedals. So you'll see CR-R, the right-hand pedal, and then CR-L for our left pedal. Another feature that most pedals in the industry have is this groove. You'll see that the right hand does not have the groove, and the left hand does. The first thing to do here, this is more of a preventative measure. Put a small amount of grease on those threads, pat those down. This just helps to ensure that we'll be able to remove this pedal later on. So take our pedal with the small amount of grease. We'll take the 6mm Allen of our included 3-way. We'll insert the Allen through the end of our crank arm. We will line up the Allen broach on the back side of our pedal. On a counterclockwise direction, we'll go ahead and spin our 3-way and carefully start the threads of our pedal. Snug this down into place and finish off by torquing to 47 to 54 Newton meters. All right, so moving on to rider's left or non-drive side. So we're going to use our 6mm Allen on our 3-way, our pedals with our small amount of grease. We're going to spin in a clockwise direction, so opposite of what we did on the drive side. And then we'll proceed to torque to 47 to 54 Newton meters. So with the bike still upside down, this is a great opportunity to run through the gears to make sure everything's shifting properly and tuned correctly. So I'll go ahead and pull the clear plastic protection off. Then this will expose our shifter here. Go ahead and spin our cranks just nice and slow, and then we'll use our shifter our shifter levers to click through each of the gears. We're just looking for smooth, consistent shifts with no clicking or grinding. If you are experiencing any type of symptoms or inconsistencies here, we do have a video that runs you through the derailleur tuning process, and that will get you going and get everything adjusted perfect. So with that, the next step here is we're going to flip the bike over and go ahead and set and tighten our stem assembly. So before we go ahead and tighten this bolt or set the preload of our headset assembly, what we want to do is make sure these bolts are loose. So these two bolts are already loose, so now we can focus on torquing our headset cap. Typically what we look for is about 2 to 4 Newton meters of torque here, and this will give us a good start on getting that headset preload perfect. I've got our 5mm hex bit, which is the size we need for our headset preload cap. And our torque wrench is set to 3 Newton meters, which is right in the middle of our recommended 2 to 4 Newton meters. So we'll use that as a great starting point. Go ahead and get that torqued. So we are set at 3 Newton meters there. Just pick the front of the bike up, just turn the bars, make sure it turns freely with not too much resistance, but enough to where we can ensure everything is in place and tight. So with that set, we know our headset preload is ready to go. The next thing we're gonna do is make sure that our handlebars are in line with our front wheel. The easiest way to do that is standing over the top of the bars. We'll use the plane of the front of our handlebar here and line up with the front of our fork crown here on both sides. So we just wanna make sure that reveal is the same on both sides. All right, so that looks great there. We're going to move on to torquing the pinch bolts on the back of our stem. This is going to be using a 4mm Allen. So you see a 4mm hex driver on here. We are going to adjust the torque wrench to 5 Newton meters, also listed here on our stem. And then we are going to go once on the top. We'll move over to the bottom. And we'll do a double sequence, so we'll also hit the top one more time. And that completes the torquing of our stem pinch bolt. So as we move on to the stem faceplate, it's very important to note one key factor here, is that the stem is designed to have no gap between the faceplate and the stem on the top, and a small gap on the stem to faceplate on the bottom, as you can see here. What we'll do here, we're gonna still use our torque wrench set to 5 Newton meters and the 4mm Allen hex bit that's required here. And we'll go ahead and torque the 2 top bolts first. With those 2 top bolts torqued, we know everything is secure and no gap present between the faceplate and the stem. We can move on to our lower clamping bolts. All right, and that completes the torquing of our stem faceplate. We're gonna go ahead and torque our rear derailleur main pivot bolt located here. So the torque value for this is 8 to 10 Newton meters. So we have our torque wrench set to 9 Newton meters right in the middle with our 5mm hex driver bit. We have our derailleur hanger cap, which is located here. And you'll also see that this cap is torqued at 11 Newton meters. Insert this 5mm hex bit through our derailleur cap. We're going to make sure it is properly engaged with our axle, and then we are going to torque. So one key thing to note here is because we're coming from the axle from the opposing side, this is going to be going in a counterclockwise direction. So with our torque wrench set in a counterclockwise direction, we're going to go ahead and torque. All right, so if your bike was purchased with a water bottle and water bottle cage, let's go ahead and go through the installation process of our cage. So step 1 is we will remove our water bottle cage bolt. So this is going to use a 3mm Allen. The way we'll want to set it up is 1 in the bottom hole here, and then 2 in the top slotted hole up here. So with those bolts in position, we'll bring this down and line it up with the holes that the bolts were originally in. We'll roll our cage into position, making sure those bolts land within those holes. We'll finish off torquing each of these bolts to 2 Newton meters. And that completes the installation of our water bottle cage. The last few things that we need to go over in order to get the bike ready for us to ride is we're going to talk about seat height, tire pressures, and also suspension setup. So what we'll do is we'll depress that same lever we used for our dropper post, make sure our post is all the way up, and then a really quick and easy gauge to see if it's, at least in the right realm of things, is place your hand on the top of your hip bone and line that up with your seat. So as you can see here, we are pretty much in line. So this is exactly what you're looking for to get a baseline saddle height. Now this will get you in the range, and then you might need to incrementally adjust up or incrementally adjust down, and you'll be doing that with the 5mm Allen head bolt that's located on your dropper post. Let's talk a little bit about tire pressure. So tire pressure is subjective, and it's definitely based on personal preference. A great place to start is anywhere from 24 to 26 PSI for our front tire, or 28 to 29 for our rear tire. And lastly, what we want to do is get the sag set up for our bike. Now, setting up sag is essentially getting the suspension set up for our body weight. And it is going to be different for every single rider. And it's a somewhat in-depth process that we go through thoroughly in our sag setup video. So definitely take a look at that, and that'll walk you through that process from A to Z. If you have any other questions beyond that, or you need help through the assembly process, or just any general setup or tech questions, don't hesitate to reach out. We'll be more than happy to help you. Thanks for choosing Intense.